The phone rang at the worst possible moment. I was standing over a hot skillet with one hand holding a spatula and the other trying to piece together my son's science project that was due the next morning. "Michael," I yelled toward the living room. "Can you get that?" No answer. My husband was neck deep in blueprints, likely too immersed to even notice the ringing. I sighed, wiped my hands on my apron, and grabbed the phone. "Julia Bennett," I answered, slightly breathless. On the other end, a woman's voice wavered, unfamiliar, yet oddly recognizable. "Julia, it's Nora Whitfield, your mother's neighbor from Ashbridge." My breath caught. She paused. I didn't know who else to call. "Your mother. Margaret, she had a stroke. She's refusing to go to the hospital. And Gregory, well, no one's seen him in over a week." The kitchen seemed to tilt. I sank into a chair, my mouth suddenly dry. "What do you mean no one's seen him?" Nora hesitated, then said he left a few days before the stroke, said he had business in town. But he never came back. "I've been checking in on her, but she only responds to you now." "Please, Julia." I didn't think. I just said it. "I'll come." Later, I'd wonder if I made that decision too fast, if some part of me had been waiting for an excuse. Michael wasn't thrilled. He paced our bedroom while I packed. "The kids have school. I've got a deadline next week." "Julia, you haven't seen your mother in over 10 years. You're seriously going back now." I didn't stop folding the sweater. "She's alone. Paralyzed. She needs someone." "She's your mother in name," he muttered. "One phone call from her and you're spiraling again." "It's different this time," I snapped, zipping the bag. "She's not just calling to guilt-trip me or ask for money. She's broken." He sighed, rubbed his forehead, and sat on the bed. "Okay, I get it. Just promise me you'll be careful. Call every day." I nodded, throat tight, eyes burning. "I will." The bus ride back to Ashbridge was slow and winding. I pressed my forehead to the window, watching the familiar forests and crumbling fences drift by like fragments of a dream I hadn't dreamed in years. The water tower, the bridge over the creek, that crooked pine tree at the corner of Maple and First. It felt like I was being transported back in time, before Gregory, before everything got twisted. There was a time when I loved that town, when my mother's laugh filled the kitchen and we picked blueberries in the yard. But that was before he moved in, before she started looking at me with those apologetic eyes that silently chose him every time. When the bus finally pulled into the tiny, peeling station, Nora was already waiting. She looked smaller than I remembered, frilier, but her eyes were sharp. "Thank God," she said, hugging me briefly. "You look just like your mother used to. Beautiful." I nodded mutely. "How is she?" "Alive," Nora whispered, but barely. "She can't speak clearly, but she understands, and she's been asking for you in her own way." The walk to the house was short but heavy. My legs felt like they were moving through wet cement. The yard was overgrown. The paint on the porch peeled in long, jagged strips. The air smelled of mildew and vinegar. Inside, the house was almost exactly the same, and completely different. The walls still held the same framed pictures, but dust clung to every surface. The kitchen sink was full of dishes. The hall light flickered. I stepped into the back bedroom, my old room. It was now a sick room. Medical supplies, a hospital bed, and her, Margaret, or whoever she really was. She looked so small. Her right side hung limp over the blanket. Her face sagged, warped by the stroke. But her eyes were clear. Awake. "Mom," I whispered. She turned her head. Tears welled up. Her lips trembled. No words came. Just a strangled noise that made my chest ache. I reached out and took her hand. "I'm here now. You're not alone." That night I couldn't sleep. Something was wrong. Not just with her health. With the house. With the silence. And most of all, with the way she kept looking at me. Like there was something she wanted to say but was too afraid to. The next morning, I decided to do what I always did when things felt out of control: organize. I went through the pantry, the cabinets, the drawers. The kitchen was a mess of expired medicine bottles, unopened mail, and half-finished grocery lists. In the back of a drawer, under a stack of old coupons, I found a rusted key. I knew immediately what it was for. The basement. I hadn't been down there in over 2 decades. The stairs creaked under my weight, the smell of damp earth and rust hitting me as soon as I opened the door. I turned on my phone flashlight and descended slowly, scanning the clutter. Old canning jars, dusty toolboxes, broken furniture. And then, something that didn't belong. A suitcase. Not just any suitcase. My father's. The monogram on the side. DB, David Bennett. My heart stopped. I hadn't seen that name in years. I unzipped it slowly, half expecting it to disintegrate. Inside were old clothes, a few books, and a folded newspaper clipping. The headline read, "Tragic car crash on I-87 kills 2, Sophie and David Bennett dead at scene." I read it again, and again. Sophie, my mother's name. But she wasn't dead. She was upstairs, alive, breathing, holding my hand last night. I stumbled backward, dropping the suitcase. My flashlight flickered. The basement plunged into darkness. But in my head, everything lit up with sickening clarity. When I finally emerged upstairs, I felt like I was walking through someone else's life. Nothing made sense. Had my entire childhood been built on a lie? Who was the woman upstairs? And where was my real mother? My thoughts were still spiraling when I heard a knock at the front door. I opened it cautiously and froze. It was her, the woman from the bus stop, the one with the familiar eyes and posture too similar to be coincidence. She looked at me calmly, dressed in a tailored coat, hair neatly pinned. "You must be Julia," she said, her voice cool but polite. "I'm Emily Rowe. I believe we have something, or someone in common." I didn't invite her in. She stepped inside anyway. "I came to speak with Margaret," she said, her eyes scanning the hallway. She knew my father, Gregory Rowe. He called me a few weeks ago, out of the blue. Said he needed to tell me something important. Then he vanished. I swallowed hard. "He's missing." "I know," she replied. "That's why I'm here." She walked toward the bedroom. I followed in a daze. Margaret was awake, eyes wide. When she saw Emily, she tried to sit up but couldn't. Her left hand gripped the blanket tightly. "You remember me, don't you?" Emily asked gently. Margaret blinked rapidly, her lips quivering. "What did he tell you?" I asked. Emily turned to me. "Not much, only that he made mistakes, and he wanted to fix them." Her jaw clenched. I waited. He never showed up. I looked between the two women. One raised me. The other could have been my sister. Then it happened. Margaret forced her lips apart and whispered. "Not me." Emily leaned in. "What do you mean?" But Margaret was too exhausted to continue. Her eyes fluttered shut. Emily looked at me, pale and trembling. "What the hell is going on here, Julia?" I didn't have an answer. Just a dozen questions tearing me apart from the inside out. Later that evening, I sat in the old study and opened the dusty photo album I found in the closet. Pictures from my early childhood. My mother, long dark hair, laughing with friends. My father, tall and gentle, holding me on his shoulders. I turned another page. A picnic by the lake. A Christmas tree. And then a photo I didn't recognize. A woman who looked like Margaret but not quite. Younger. Harsher. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. Next to her, Gregory. The year on the back said 1985. And that's when I knew. The woman in that photo wasn't Sophie. And she wasn't the one who raised me. She was someone else entirely. I had to find out who. I had to know why. The next morning, I made a call I never thought I'd make. DR. Raymond Carter had been the town's general practitioner for decades. He treated me for strep throat, stitched my chin when I fell off my bike, and was one of the few people in Ashbridge who'd always seemed aware. I found him at the small community clinic, a modest building tucked behind the post office, still surrounded by the same chipped white fence from my childhood. He recognized me the moment I walked in. "Julia," he said, peering over his glasses. "You're the image of your mother. Well, of Margaret, I suppose." There was something in his tone that made my skin prickle. I wasted no time. "I need to know the truth," I said. "About her. About Gregory. About who I really am." He motioned for me to sit, then closed the door to his office. For a long moment, he didn't say anything. Then he spoke slowly. I suspected this day would come, but I hoped, selfishly, that it wouldn't. He folded his hands. "Julia, the woman you know as Margaret Bennett. Her real name is Margaret Rowe. She was Gregory's first wife, and she's not your biological mother." I stared at him, unable to process the words. He continued carefully, "Your real mother, Sophie Rowe, and your father, David Bennett, died in that car accident 34 years ago. Officially," he sighed, "but unofficially, things were never that simple." My voice barely rose above a whisper. "Are you saying Gregory faked something? That he replaced her?" Dr. Carter nodded. "After Sophie's death, Gregory pulled strings. He convinced Margaret to assume Sophie's identity. Why? Because Sophie had inherited your father's business, and with her gone, that inheritance passed through you. You were just a child. So he married Margaret again under Sophie's name, adopted you, and gained legal control over everything." I felt like the floor had disappeared beneath me. "And she agreed to this?" "He threatened her," Dr. Carter said quietly. "Said he'd ruin her, or worse, harm you. She had no choice. I helped process some of the medical paperwork. I was young, scared, and he had connections, money, influence." I pressed a hand to my chest. "So for 30 years she lived a lie. And I grew up calling a stranger my mother." "She's not a stranger, Julia," Dr. Carter said softly. "She raised you, protected you in the only way she could. But yes, she's not Sophie." I didn't remember leaving the clinic. Somehow, I ended up back at the house, gripping the steering wheel, staring at the front door like it was a wall I didn't know how to climb. Inside, Margaret was awake. Her expression told me she already knew where I'd been. I sat on the edge of the bed, took her hand, and whispered, "You should have told me." Her lips moved. It took her a long time to form the words. "Couldn't." "I know," I said. "I know he made you, but I needed to hear it from you." Her eyes filled with tears. "I'm sorry," she breathed, "for everything." That night, Emily returned with a file folder. She laid it on the kitchen table. "This is my birth certificate," she said. "Gregory Rowe is listed as my father, and the mother, Sophie Rowe, the same woman you thought was your mother." I flipped the page. A photo was clipped to the back. A woman with long, dark hair holding a baby, Emily, while Gregory stood behind her. But the woman, she wasn't Margaret. She wasn't the woman who raised me. She was someone else. "That's Sophie," Emily said. "Your real mother." Margaret's voice came from the hallway, faint but urgent. "That not me," we rushed to her. She was sitting up, trembling, pointing at the photo, shaking her head. "Not me." Her chest rose and fell rapidly. Her eyes pleaded for understanding. "I know," I whispered. "I know now." But nothing could have prepared me for what would come next. Nothing. The knock on the door came just as the kettle started to whistle. I turned off the stove, half expecting it to be Emily again with another piece of the puzzle. But when I opened the door, a man stood there in a charcoal gray suit, shoulders stiff, eyes cold. "Julia Bennett?" he asked. "Yes." "Vincent Mallory," he said, stepping inside before I could respond. "I was Gregory Rowe's business partner. We need to talk." We sat in the kitchen, Emily joining moments later with her arms crossed tight across her chest. Vincent placed a slim leather folder on the table and opened it with precision. €2 million, he said. That's how much Gregory embezzled from our resort project at Lake Champlain. He wired it out from our joint account 6 days before he disappeared. My throat clenched. And you think we know where it went? You're his wife's daughter, he said to me. Then to Emily. And you're his actual daughter. How convenient. No one knows anything. We didn't speak to him for years, I said flatly. Neither of us knew what he was involved in. Emily added, he only reached out to me 2 weeks ago. I assumed maybe he had regrets. Vincent leaned back in his chair. Then here's my warning. The money will be found. If not through Gregory, then through whoever's left behind. His assets, this house, for instance, are all in play. This house belonged to my mother, I snapped. It has nothing to do with your stolen funds. You sure about that? He asked, a smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. Gregory was nothing if not thorough. After he left, the silence between me and Emily was thick with dread. He thinks we know something, she whispered. Do we? I didn't answer. Instead, I called Michael. I think you need to come up here, I told him. This is bigger than just family secrets. He was already packing when I finished the sentence. When Michael arrived the next morning, he didn't waste time. We need to see every legal document Gregory ever touched, he said. We started digging through his old study, filing cabinets, locked drawers, even behind the drywall where I remembered him once hiding a bottle of whiskey. That's where we found it, a false panel beneath the floorboard. Inside was a black binder, and inside that chaos, wire transfers, land titles, falsified tax records, and then a page that made my blood run cold. A payout from an insurance company dated a month after my parents' death. A death benefit claimed by Sophie Rowe, except the signature matched Margaret's handwriting. He collected the money, Michael said, scanning the paper. Used Margaret to sign as Sophie. It's fraud across state lines. This was the plan all along, I whispered. The accident, it wasn't just an accident. That night, I sat by Margaret's bed, holding the black binder in my lap. You knew he'd killed them, I said softly. My real parents. You couldn't say it, but you knew. She didn't look away. He said accident, she rasped. I didn't believe. But you stayed, I said, voice shaking. You helped him take their lives and build something on top of their graves. I tried to protect you, her voice cracked. I became the mother you lost. I looked away, because she had. In her twisted, broken way, she had. The next morning, the front porch creaked with the sound of boots. When I opened the door, Officer Daniel Ruiz stood there, flanked by a plainclothes investigator. Ms. Bennett, he said, we've found Gregory Rowe's body. The words dropped like lead. Where? I managed. Old, well behind the churchyard, Ruiz said. Found by a teenager retrieving a lost drone. Cause of death, blunt force trauma to the head. Estimated time of death, about a week before your mother's stroke. My hands trembled. Do you think? I couldn't finish. We don't suspect your mother at this time, he replied. Her condition makes it unlikely. But Mr. Mallory's name came up. We're bringing him in. Emily stood in the hallway, listening to every word. Her face was pale, unreadable. He's dead, she said after they left. Just like that. I nodded. But that doesn't mean it's over. Because we still didn't know who we were, or what else Gregory Rowe had stolen from us. But we were going to find out. Michael wasted no time. As soon as the officers left, he started documenting everything. Photos of the documents, timelines, insurance records, even the hidden binder. If we're going to restore your mother's real identity, he said, we need proof that Gregory manipulated the system. And we've got it. What's trickier is unraveling the financial damage he left behind. Emily sat across the table, silent. Her fingers traced the rim of her coffee cup again and again. You know what I keep thinking about, she finally said. All those birthdays, Christmases, the little gifts I got in the mail growing up. I always thought they were from some anonymous guardian angel. She looked up at me. Turns out it was her, Margaret, using money Gregory funneled through his partner to keep both our lives barely afloat. She did what she could, I said quietly, but now it's time to do more than survive. Emily nodded. It's time we tell the truth, out loud. We filed the paperwork the next morning, a formal petition to legally restore Margaret's name, Margaret Rowe Bennett, along with an affidavit explaining her 30-year impersonation under coercion. The courthouse clerk raised an eyebrow at the stack of documents but didn't ask questions. In small towns, people often suspect more than they admit. Margaret's health was improving slowly, with speech therapy and a specialist Michael found. She had started forming full sentences again. When we told her about the legal petition, she only whispered, "Thank you for seeing me." That same day, Nora came by. She looked more fragile than usual, her shoulders hunched like she carried more than just years. "I need to tell you something," she said, sitting heavily at the kitchen table. "About Sophie, about the night of the accident." Emily leaned forward. "You knew her." "We were best friends in college," Nora said. "I was the one who introduced her to Gregory. If I'd known then," she stopped, her voice catching. "After the accident, I knew something wasn't right. I came back to Ashbridge 2 years later. Margaret was living here by then, but she wasn't Sophie. Not really. She didn't smile the same, didn't walk the same. I didn't say anything. He threatened me. Said if I talked, he'd make sure I disappeared too. But I helped where I could. Sent money. Passed along gifts. Kept both of you alive in the only way I could." Emily's eyes shimmered. "You were the one who sent me the necklace." "Yes," Nora whispered. "From your real mother's jewelry box." That night, Michael found another secret. Hidden beneath a floor tile in Gregory's study, a box no bigger than a shoebox. Inside, one final ledger. Not finances, not blueprints, but something more intimate. Handwritten notes, surveillance records, transfers to shell companies, and in the back, clippings from the original police report on the accident that killed my parents. Scribbled notes in the margins. Brake failure manipulated. Timing perfect. No survivors, perfect storm. Emily stood beside me, reading over my shoulder. "He documented it," she breathed. "He was proud of it. He didn't just destroy our families," I said. "He wanted to remember how he did it. Every step." Michael set the box down, gently. This might change everything. 2 days later, the court approved the petition. Margaret Bennett's true identity was legally restored. For the first time in 35 years, she held papers with her real name on them. When we gave them to her, she held them like a newborn child. "I'm me again," she whispered. Finally. But not everyone was ready to let go. Emily looked at me later that night as we folded Gregory's suits into donation bags. "You know," she said, "we're not really sisters." "No," I agreed. "Not by blood." "But I feel like we are," she added softly. "He tried to erase who we were, but somehow we found each other anyway." I nodded, and maybe that's what matters more. As we turned off the lights, I glanced back at Margaret, asleep in her chair, the papers still clutched to her chest. For the first time in decades, she looked at peace. But there was still one more question neither of us could ignore. Who killed Gregory Rowe? 3 weeks passed in a strange rhythm. Court dates, therapy appointments, legal filings, and long evenings filled with quiet conversations that felt heavier than any storm. Margaret's speech had improved drastically. She still stumbled, still paused when emotion overtook her, but her voice carried strength now, the kind forged not by volume, but by surviving what should have destroyed her. Emily rented a small apartment 2 blocks from our house. She said it was temporary, but her books filled the shelves by the second week, and her teacups were in the cabinet before month's end. One night, over dinner, she said it out loud. I'm not leaving. I don't think I could even if I wanted to. Michael looked up from his wine. Your family. It'd be weird if you left. We had become something none of us expected. A stitched-together mosaic of broken people trying to build a future from shattered truths. And somehow it worked. But the questions didn't stop. The police had enough to close the embezzlement case, thanks to Gregory's meticulous records. The insurance fraud, the stolen assets, even the coerced identity theft. Every layer unraveled beneath their fingertips. Yet one thread remained tangled: his death. Vincent Mallory remained in custody. His prints were on the pipe. His motive was undeniable, but something didn't sit right. Margaret never asked if he had been arrested. She never asked what had happened in the backyard that night, but she stopped locking her bedroom door. One evening, after dinner, Emily found me alone on the porch. I still don't know how to feel about her, she said, watching the wind roll through the maple trees. Part of me wants to forgive. Part of me wants to scream. She knew who I was. She let me disappear. I didn't interrupt. She needed the space to say it. But then, I see her with your kids. I see how gently she speaks now, how broken she is, and I wonder if maybe she was always a prisoner, too. She was, I said, but that doesn't erase the damage. No, Emily agreed, but it explains it. A week later, Margaret asked to go to the courthouse herself. Not for documents this time, for closure. I want to look at the name on the record, she said. I want to see that it's really me. Michael helped her into the car. I followed behind with a folder full of paperwork. When we stepped into the clerk's office and handed over the form, the woman behind the counter smiled. We just updated the record this morning, she said, tapping the screen. You're all set, Mrs. Bennett. Margaret blinked back tears. Thank you for saying that. On the way home, she turned to me and said, I want to move. Somewhere closer to you. Maybe a small apartment with a view. Of course, I said. We'll find you something quiet. Safe. Yours. She looked out the window. I'd like to learn to paint. I never did anything for myself before. Maybe it's time. That night, Emily surprised us with news. There's a position at a local architecture firm, she said. They specialize in restoration. Old things, broken buildings, making them beautiful again. Sounds like your specialty, I smiled. She nodded. Maybe it's in our blood. Rebuilding what others tried to erase. And for the first time in months, we laughed. It wasn't a big moment. No confetti, no speeches, just the sound of a family that had survived hell and was learning how to breathe again. But deep down, we knew the final storm hadn't passed yet. There were still things buried deeper than Gregory's lies, and we were about to dig them up. The courthouse was quiet the morning we gave our final testimonies. I sat beside Emily on the hard wooden bench, both of us holding folders too full of truth. Margaret stayed home. Her doctor advised against the stress, but I think she already knew we were strong enough to finish this for her. We handed over the binder from Gregory's study, the hidden ledger, the forged documents, the payout trails. It was all there. The investigators flipped through pages with tight jaws, occasionally underlining something, whispering to each other. We told them about the night of the argument behind the church, about Vincent Mallory's threats, about the man who believed money made him untouchable. When the session ended, the detective leaned back in his chair. It's enough, he said. To convict Mallory of financial conspiracy, yes. For the murder, that's trickier. He still claims Gregory was alive when he left. But we've got more than enough to keep digging. We thanked them, left our contact information, and walked into the crisp Vermont air like people finally released from a long shadow. But even freedom comes with weight. That night, Emily asked if she could see the grave. We hadn't gone in years. Not since I was a teenager. I used to think visiting the headstone of people I barely remembered was more for show than for healing. But now, I understood. We drove in silence, parked beside the rusted fence, walked past the rows of names and dates, worn down by rain and time. There they were, David Bennett, Sophie Roe Bennett, forever loved, forever stolen. Emily stood beside me, her arms crossed tight, chin trembling. I never met her, she said, but she gave me life, and then lost hers to a man who wanted control more than love. I reached out and took her hand. She'd be proud of you. Emily laughed softly, bitterly. Of both of us, maybe. For surviving him. For not letting his story be the final one told. We didn't stay long. Graves aren't for the dead. They're for the living to feel something they can't put into words. When we got home, Margaret was sitting in the living room, a half-finished watercolor in her lap. She smiled when she saw us. No questions, just that smile. And maybe that was enough. Weeks passed. The news about Vincent Mallory's arrest spread quietly through town. Some still believed he wasn't the killer. Some were sure he was. But the truth was, we might never know exactly how Gregory died. Whether it was murder, vengeance, or consequence finally catching up. Maybe it didn't matter. What mattered was this: the lies died with him. That winter, Margaret moved into a small apartment in the same building as Emily. She filled it with books, soft blankets, and art supplies. My kids began calling her Grandma Maggie without hesitation. They didn't need bloodlines to love her, just kindness and presence. Emily thrived. The architecture firm offered her a permanent role. She started restoring a Victorian house on the edge of town. Faded yellow paint, broken porch, sagging roof. It reminds me of us, she joked one day. Old bones, still worth saving. Michael took a photo of all of us that Christmas, Margaret in her new sweater, the kids laughing, Emily sipping tea, and me finally breathing. He framed it with the words, "The family we found," not the one we were given. And now, as I sit here writing this, I want to leave you, whoever you are reading, with what I learned. Family is not defined by blood. It's defined by the people who choose to stay, even when the truth is messy and the past is unforgivable. Truth doesn't fix everything, but it clears the wreckage so you can rebuild. Forgiveness isn't forgetting. It's choosing not to let what broke you keep you broken. Some people spend their lives manipulating others, trying to rewrite fate. Gregory Roe was one of them. But even the most careful puppeteers eventually get tangled in their own strings. In the end, he lost everything. And we found each other. We stitched our lives back together with old photos, painful stories, and the soft strength of starting over. It wasn't perfect. It never will be. But it's ours. And that makes it enough. It makes it real.